Between the summer of 1979 and the spring of 1981, the city of Atlanta, Georgia, was paralyzed by a series of murders that would ultimately claim the lives of at least 29 young black victims, mostly children and teenagers, though some young adults. The first signs that something sinister was happening came on July 28, 1979, when two boys, Edward Hope Smith, aged 14, and Alfred Evans, aged 13, disappeared. Their bodies were discovered a few days later in a wooded area. Both had been killed by asphyxiation. Initially, the cases were treated as separate, tragic, but unrelated crimes. But in the weeks and months that followed, more children began to vanish. Their bodies were often found dumped in wooded areas, vacant lots, and eventually, rivers. Most had been strangled, bludgeoned, or asphyxiated. The methods varied, but the consistent victim profile, a young black male from a low-income neighborhood, began to form a chilling pattern. As the death toll rose, panic spread through the city. Black families were especially terrified. Many kept their children indoors, and community leaders demanded answers from city officials. At first, the police were reluctant to link the murders. Some victims were initially dismissed as runaways or presumed to be involved in drugs or street crime. The community's outcry eventually forced the formation of a special task force to investigate the growing list of homicides. With assistance from the FBI, a full-scale manhunt was launched. Police began canvassing neighborhoods, interviewing thousands of witnesses, and attempting to find any forensic links between the crime scenes. Despite these efforts, the killings continued. Victims such as Yusuf Bell 9, Eric Middlebrooks 14, and Luby Getter 14 shocked the community with the brutality of their murders. Many were found naked or partially clothed. Some posed or placed in disturbing ways. Several were discovered near bodies of water, particularly the Chattahoochee River, which would become significant later in the investigation. The media dubbed the killing spree the Atlanta child murders, and the national spotlight turned on the city. Atlanta, with its emerging image as a modern, progressive metropolis in the post-civil rights South, was now grappling with a nightmare that threatened to destroy its reputation. In early 1981, police began focusing their surveillance on bridges and riverbanks, suspecting that the killer was disposing of bodies into the Chattahoochee River. On May 22, 1981, officers stationed near the Jackson Parkway Bridge heard a loud splash in the middle of the night. They soon spotted a vehicle turning around suspiciously near the bridge and stopped the driver. His name was Wayne Bertram Williams, a 23-year-old African-American freelance photographer, music promoter, and self-described talent scout. Williams claimed he was on his way to audition a young singer, a story that immediately raised suspicions given the hour and location. A few days later, the body of Nathaniel Cater, a 27-year-old black man who had recently gone missing, was found in the river downstream from the same bridge. Police had no concrete proof of murder, but fibers recovered from Cater's body matched fibers from Williams' car, home, and pet dog. Another recent victim, Jimmy Ray Payne, also bore similar fiber evidence. Investigators believed these fibers were crucial, traced back to a unique carpet and dog hair that could be definitively linked to Williams' residence. Though the fiber evidence was circumstantial, it was enough to build a case. Wayne Williams was arrested on June 21, 1981, and charged not with the child murders, but with the murders of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne, two adult men. This decision drew immediate criticism. Though authorities publicly declared they believed Williams was responsible for at least 22 of the 29 murders, they only prosecuted him for 2. At trial, prosecutors introduced testimony linking Williams to 10 other victims in order to establish a pattern. They also presented fiber analysis as their strongest physical evidence, showing that fibers from Williams's environment were found on multiple victims. Several witnesses also testified that Williams had been seen with some of the victims before their deaths, though the accounts were inconsistent and at times speculative. The defense, led by attorney Mary Welcome, argued that the fiber evidence was circumstantial and unreliable, especially given the lack of eyewitnesses to any of the murders. Williams did not take the stand in his own defense, but he consistently proclaimed his innocence, both in court and to the media. His attorneys raised the issue of police and political pressure, arguing that the city, under intense scrutiny, was desperate to close the case, and had zeroed in on Williams as a convenient suspect, young, black, and eccentric, with no solid alibi and a suspicious story. They also pointed out that Wayne Williams did not fit the typical profile of a serial child killer. The racial aspect of the case further complicated the trial, as it was one of the few instances where a black man was accused of killing multiple black children, and the broader community reaction was divided. After a 6-week trial and less than 12 hours of jury deliberation, Wayne Williams was found guilty on February 27, 1982, for the murders of Cater and Payne. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison. Following his conviction, authorities officially closed the book on the Atlanta child murders, attributing nearly all of the 29 deaths to him. Williams was never tried for the child victims, and to this day, no one else has ever been charged in connection with their deaths. Despite the case being technically closed, controversy has surrounded it for decades. Many of the victims' families have continued to question whether Williams was actually responsible for all the killings. Some believe he may have been guilty of killing the adults but not the children. Others think he was a scapegoat used to ease public pressure. There were also rumors and reports of possible Ku Klux Klan involvement in some of the murders, with declassified FBI files revealing that the KK had been under surveillance during the investigation and may have been linked to at least 3 of the early deaths. However, no charges were ever brought against any Klan members, and the FBI reportedly halted its investigation to avoid triggering a race war. In 2019, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and Police Chief Erica Shields announced the reopening of the case. They plan to retest evidence from the original investigation using advanced DNA and forensic technologies not available at the time. As of now, no new arrests or breakthroughs have been publicly announced. Williams remains incarcerated, having been denied parole multiple times. He continues to maintain his innocence, and supporters argue that he was the victim of a rushed investigation, shoddy forensic work, and political expediency. The victims and their stories. The first 2 victims, Edward Hope Smith, 14, and Alfred Evans, 13, were last seen on July 20, 1979. Smith had reportedly gone to see a movie and never returned. Evans was reported missing just a few hours after Smith, and their bodies were discovered together in a wooded area on July 28. Smith had been shot with a .22 caliber gun, while Evans' cause of death was asphyxiation. At the time, police treated the deaths as separate incidents. On September 4th, Milton Harvey, 14, went missing while running an errand for his mother to the bank. His body wasn't discovered until over a month later, on October 13th. He was found in a remote area, his remains decomposed, with the cause of death undetermined. Yusuf Bell 9 disappeared on October 21, 1979. His mother had sent him to the store to buy snuff for a neighbor. He never returned. Bell's body was found on November 8th in an abandoned school, neatly laid out in a crawl space. He had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Angelo Littleboy Sims, 14, went missing in November 1979. His remains were never found, but he was presumed dead and added to the list by investigators due to connections in location and profile. Jeffrey Mathis, 10, vanished on March 11, 1980, while running an errand for his mother. His skeletal remains were found in a wooded area in DeKalb County several months later in June. The cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition. Eric Middlebrooks, 14, an honor student, was last seen riding his bicycle on May 18, 1980. He was found the next day behind a bar, bludgeoned with a piece of concrete and with ligature marks indicating strangulation. Just 2 days later, Christopher Richardson, 12, a Boy Scout and aspiring minister, disappeared. His body was not discovered until January 1981, nearly 8 months later, in a wooded area. He had been asphyxiated. LaTanya Wilson, 7, the first female victim linked to the case, was abducted from her apartment in the middle of the night on June 22, 1980. Witnesses reported seeing a man break into the home. Her body wasn't found until more than a year later, in February 1981. Cause of death was undetermined. Aaron Wyche, 10, was last seen walking home from a store in June 1980. His body was found later that month in a wooded area. Like others, the cause of death could not be definitively determined due to decomposition. Anthony Carter, 9, was found stabbed to death on July 6, 1980, just hours after he went missing. He had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and back, making him one of the few victims who died from a non-asphyxiation method. Earl Terrell, 10, disappeared on July 31, 1980, after swimming at a local pool. His body was found shortly afterward in a wooded area, decomposed. Cause of death could not be confirmed. Clifford Jones, 13, who had just moved to Atlanta from Cleveland, Ohio, was last seen August 20, 1980. His body was discovered the next day behind a dumpster. He had been sexually assaulted and strangled with a cord. Darren Glass, 10, went missing on September 14, 1980. His remains were never found, though he was added to the official victim list due to the circumstances of his disappearance. Charles Stevens, 12, vanished on October 9, 1980. His body was discovered shortly thereafter, but extensive decomposition prevented any clear determination of cause of death. Aaron Jackson, 9, disappeared on November 1, 1980. His body was found the next day in a wooded area. Cause of death was asphyxiation. Patrick Rogers, 16, was last seen on December 7, 1980. His body was found in a river, weighted down with a concrete block tied to his waist. His cause of death was drowning, though there were signs he may have been unconscious or dead prior to entering the water. Luby Getter, 14, vanished on January 3, 1981, after going to a shopping mall. His body was found weeks later in a wooded area. Getter had been strangled. Terry Pugh, 15, was last seen on January 22, 1981. His body was dumped along a highway, bound and strangled. He had ligature marks on his neck and wrists. Patrick Baltazar, 11, disappeared February 6, 1981. His body was found several days later in a wooded area. He had been strangled, and investigators found hair and fiber evidence that would later be linked to Wayne Williams. Curtis Walker, 13, went missing on February 19th. He was found days later in a river. Cause of death was asphyxiation. Hair and fiber evidence again linked to Williams. Joseph Bell, 15, was last seen in early March 1981. His body was later found in a river. Fiber evidence linked him to Williams as well. Timothy Hill, 13, went missing March 15th. His body was discovered in a river. He had been strangled. Eddie Duncan, 21, the first openly gay victim and one of the first adults considered part of the case, was found floating in a river. Cause of death was asphyxiation. Larry Rogers, 20, John Porter, 28, and Jimmy Ray Payne, 21, all went missing in spring 1981. Their bodies were found in rivers with fiber evidence pointing toward Williams. These victims began to shift the investigation from child-focused to a broader serial pattern that included young adults. Nathaniel Cater, 27, was last seen alive in May 1981. On May 22, 1981, police heard a splash in the Chattahoochee River during a surveillance operation. Minutes later, they stopped a car driven by Wayne Williams, who claimed to be scouting talent. 2 days later, Cater's body was recovered downstream. Like Payne and others, he had been asphyxiated, and fiber evidence linked him to Williams's environment, car, home, and dog. The Atlanta child murders remain one of the most haunting and polarizing chapters in American criminal history. The horror of the crimes, the ambiguity of the resolution, and the racial and social dynamics surrounding the case have ensured that, decades later, the wounds are still open. For many, the biggest tragedy of all is that the victims, young black boys from poor families, never received the full justice or national attention they deserved. Whether Wayne Williams was the true killer or merely a convenient suspect, the complete truth about what happened in Atlanta between 1979 and 1981 has yet to be fully revealed.